The first time I met Alora Oakley, she was standing on my newly poured gravel driveway with a clipboard in one hand and a frown carved so deep into her face I thought it might be permanent. "You can't just build a cabin here, mister." "Farlin," she said, her tone a mix of condescension and saccharine fake kindness. "It's not up to HOA code. I just finished unloading a stack of pine boards from the bed of my truck and was still wearing my work gloves. I leaned on the tailgate and gave her a look. Alora, this is my land. Zoned residential. The county gave me the permit. The cabin's fully within my rights." She tapped her pen against the clipboard like she was auditioning for a power trip. "But the aesthetic of the neighborhood, our HOA guidelines require all structures to be in harmony with existing homes. Your log structure doesn't meet the visual standard." I almost laughed. "You mean the standard you made up? Because I read the CCRs front to back, twice." Alora's mouth twitched and I could tell she wasn't used to being challenged. "We'll be issuing a formal violation notice." "Expect that within the week." I didn't respond. Just watched her totter off in her wedge heels, back to her beige stucco palace, muttering something about maintaining property values. Now, I'm not a guy who likes stirring the pot, but I'm also not one to roll over when someone thinks they can push me around with phony rules. I'm Franklin Merritt, retired city inspector, and I know more about code than Alora Oakley ever will. The cabin was a small, one-room getaway I'd been building on weekends, a quiet spot on the back end of my property, overlooking a creek. My daughter, Beth, loved it. We called it the Hideout. Over the next few days, Alora escalated. First came the violation notice, which I expected. Then came the fines: $500 for non-conforming structure, $200 for unauthorized exterior materials, even $100 for lack of landscape integration. That last one made me chuckle. The cabin was surrounded by trees. Nature was the landscaping. I appealed the fines at the next board meeting, but Alora cut me off 3 sentences in. "Mr. Merritt, you're welcome to speak when the board recognizes you. Until then, please refrain." I looked around the table at the other board members. None of them said a word. Just nodded along like they were hypnotized by her bob haircut and fake pearls. So I did what any man who spent 30 years inspecting buildings would do. I filed an official county inspection report, with my name on it. Yes, I still held an inactive license. And yes, I had every legal right to submit a one-time inspection on private property I owned. I went through every detail: foundation depth, fire retardant materials, setback requirements, load-bearing calculations. I even submitted high-res photos and a compliance checklist. The county signed off within 72 hours. The next morning, I walked the report over to Alora's house and handed it to her in person. She was watering her hydrangeas like she didn't have a vendetta bubbling just under that smile. "What's this?" she said. "Official inspection." "Fully up to code, approved, every inch of it." She scanned the front page and I watched her face freeze. Her eyes darted to my signature at the bottom. "F. Merritt, you're that Merritt?" "Yep," I said, "the one who used to sign off on new developments downtown. The one who helped write the residential compliance handbook the city uses. That one." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I tipped my hat. "Have a good one, Alora," and walked away before she could thaw. 3 days after I handed Alora the inspection report, a white SUV with magnetic HOA decals rolled up my gravel drive like it was on official government business. The driver didn't bother knocking. I watched from the porch as he got out, snapped a dozen photos of the cabin from different angles and scribbled something into a notepad. I waited until he crouched down near the foundation to walk over. "You with the board?" I asked, arms folded. He stood up quickly, startled. Yes." "Jason Bell, Compliance Enforcement." "Didn't know we had one of those," I said. He cleared his throat and held up a badge-sized laminate that looked like it had been printed at home and laminated at a Kinko's. "Recently appointed." "The board voted to expand enforcement authority." I raised an eyebrow. "And you're here because?" Well, the board's concerned about environmental runoff. There's a suggestion your structure may be impacting the watershed. Suggestion from who? I asked. He hesitated, then flipped the notebook closed. We've received reports. Right, I said. Reports. I didn't argue further. Instead, I walked around the back of the cabin, pulled open the lock on the utility shed, and came back with a copy of the hydrology report I'd commissioned before laying a single board. I dropped it into his hands, signed off by the county's environmental division. No runoff risk, no erosion hazard. You want to quote code, go ahead, but you're wasting your time. Jason looked it over, then awkwardly nodded and left without another word. That evening, I dug deeper. I called an old friend of mine, Maureen Latimer, who still worked in municipal zoning. She owed me a favor after I helped her nephew get his contracting license reinstated. I gave her the name of the HOA and asked her to pull any recent filings or permit challenges. The next morning, she called back. "Franklin, it's worse than you thought," she said. "Lay it on me." They filed a petition with the county to rezone half your property as common recreational space, claimed it was historically used by the community, and was mistakenly recorded as private in the last survey. I nearly dropped the phone. They're trying to steal it. That's not the word they used, but yes, if it gets approved, you'd have to tear down the cabin and surrender that land. Who filed it? Elora Oakley. Signed and submitted it herself. The lines between petty harassment and criminal fraud had just been crossed. I drove straight to the county recorder's office. Within the hour, I had copies of the petition, the forged community usage affidavit, and a notarized signature from a neighbor who had moved out 3 years ago. She was claiming under penalty of perjury that she and other residents had used my land as a community gathering spot for over a decade. I took everything to the sheriff's office that afternoon and requested a formal investigation into document fraud and attempted land misappropriation. The deputy on duty raised an eyebrow when I laid out the paperwork. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked. "I'm not letting them rewrite property lines with forged signatures." He nodded slowly. "We'll open a case. You'll get a call from Detective Alvarez." By the end of the week, Alvarez showed up at my place. He was a tall man, about my age, with a tired but sharp look in his eyes. We sat on the porch while I went over everything: the fines, the false compliance issues, Jason's fake enforcement role, and now the rezoning attempt based on outright lies. "I've seen HOAs bully people before," Alvarez said. "But this is organized, there's a paper trail. And you've kept it." I knew where this was heading, I said. "She wasn't going to stop," he nodded, flipping through the documents. "You'd be surprised how many people fold when the fines start coming. You didn't." "Because I know what to look for," I said. "She's playing power games." "But she's sloppy." Over the next few weeks, Alvarez started interviewing neighbors quietly. I didn't tell anyone what was happening, but word got around that something was up. People started stopping by my place. Some brought coffee, others brought stories. A retired nurse named Janice told me that after she put solar panels on her roof, Elora fined her for unauthorized energy alterations. A mechanic down the street said Elora had threatened to tow his work truck if he didn't keep it covered on his own property. A widow named Helen revealed that her backyard koi pond had been declared a mosquito hazard, and she was forced to drain it. It wasn't just me. The board had spent years slowly tightening the screws on anyone who didn't fit Elora's vision of what the neighborhood should look like. I shared all of this with Alvarez, who started piecing together a pattern: selective enforcement, fabricated violations, and untraceable fines routed through a shell management company that just happened to be owned by Elora's sister-in-law. That was the real kicker. When Alvarez subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, the web unraveled. Thousands of dollars in violation payments had been funneled through personal accounts, landscaping contracts with non-existent companies, security patrols that never showed up but were billed monthly. And the worst of it, Alora had created an unauthorized emergency reserve fund that she controlled exclusively. Not even the other board members had access. Then came the arrest warrant. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when two cruisers rolled into the neighborhood. No sirens. No lights. Just business. They knocked on Alora's door. She answered in a silk robe, coffee in hand. A minute later, she was in cuffs charged with fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of public records. The neighborhood watched from porches and windows, silent at first. Then came the murmurs. Then applause. The next HOA meeting was standing room only, with Alora suspended pending trial and 3 other board members resigning overnight. The board couldn't even form a quorum. A special election was called. I didn't plan to run, but Helen nominated me from the floor. People started clapping before I could object, so I accepted. We rewrote the bylaws within 60 days, term limits, oversight committees, mandatory audits, no more closed-door votes, and the best part? The fines were frozen indefinitely. Every single one issued in the past 12 months was reviewed, and over 80% were reversed. The cabin stood untouched. Beth painted a sign and hammered it into the ground next to the gravel path. The hideout community welcome. We held the next board meeting there, under the shade of the big walnut tree, folding chairs set in a circle. People brought lemonade, pie, even a projector to review the new transparency measures. Nobody missed the clubhouse, and nobody missed Alora. The first real sign that things had changed came on a cloudy Friday morning when a group of neighbors showed up at my place with tarps, lumber, and a folding table full of coffee and donuts. No announcement, no formal request, just people rolling up their sleeves. "We figured you could use a proper deck out back," said Janice, the retired nurse, already measuring out the dimensions with a chalk line. I didn't argue. We spent the next 6 hours building a wraparound porch behind the cabin. Someone brought a portable speaker and played old blues records. Kids ran along the creek. No one mentioned the HOA once. But while the neighborhood was rebuilding itself, the investigation was still very much alive. Detective Alvarez called me that evening. His voice was more clipped than usual. "Franklin, we just got access to Alora's HOA email server. You'll want to hear what we found." I set down my coffee. "She was intercepting property sale notifications," Alvarez continued. "Anytime someone listed their home, she'd flag it, then contact the escrow company pretending to be an HOA representative. Claimed the sellers owed outstanding dues even when they didn't. She'd demand immediate wire transfers to a lien release account or threaten to block the sale." I felt my jaw tighten. How many homeowners? 17 so far, around $82,000 total. "We're still digging. Can you recover any of it? Depends. Some of the transfers were routed through dummy LLCs, but we've frozen 3 accounts already." She wasn't as good at hiding her tracks as she thought. The next week, subpoenas went out to the escrow companies she'd contacted. One of her fake email accounts had even used a domain name nearly identical to the official HOA address, just 1 letter off. It was classic phishing, dressed up in neighborhood politeness. The prosecutor's office filed additional charges: wire fraud, identity deception, and obstruction of real estate transactions. That bumped her bail hearing into the Superior Court. I attended, sitting quietly behind a row of reporters, none of whom had ever heard of Millridge Hollow before Alora's arrest. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, read through the charges without flinching. Alora stood at the defense table in a navy pantsuit, her hair pulled tight, lips pressed into a line. No clipboard this time, no pearls. Just the unmistakable look of someone realizing the rules had changed and not in her favor. Her attorney requested house arrest. The judge denied it without blinking. She abused a position of authority, used deception to extract funds from vulnerable residents, and falsified legal documents to interfere in property rights, she said. She will remain in custody until trial. Back in the neighborhood, the shift was undeniable. Mailboxes once painted in uniform beige were suddenly blooming with color. People stopped whispering about fines and started openly discussing improvements. A pair of high schoolers hosted a weekend art class at the creek. Someone rigged solar lights along the walking path, but not everyone was happy. A few of Alora's old allies' folks who'd benefited from her selective enforcement started pushing back against the new board. They called an emergency meeting to propose reinstating the old Architectural Review Committee. I showed up carrying a binder half an inch thick. When they tried to argue that the community was becoming unruly, I opened to a spreadsheet showing every fine issued under the prior board, cross-referenced with property values and complaint sources. Not one violation had been issued to the 5 properties owned by current dissenters. "You're not worried about disorder," I said. "You're worried the rest of us finally have a say." The vote wasn't even close. The proposal failed and the committee was permanently dissolved, but there was still one piece I couldn't shake. Helen, the widow with the koi pond, had come to me with something odd. A letter she'd received 2 years ago threatening legal action if she didn't remove a garden sculpture. It was typed, formal, and signed by a lawyer named Cameron Dwyer only. No such lawyer existed in the state bar registry. I brought it to Alvarez. "I've seen 2 more like this," he said. "Same name, same tone, different issues. She invented a legal advisor." We traced the address on the letterhead to a P.O. box downtown. The rental records matched a payment card tied to Alora's husband, who claimed he thought it was related to a charity mailing list. He wasn't charged, but the fake legal threats added another layer to the charges: impersonation of legal authority. The trial was set for early spring. I was called as a witness, along with Alvarez, Maureen, and 8 homeowners who'd been targeted by Alora's schemes. The courtroom wasn't packed, but the tension was thick. Her defense tried to paint it all as a series of administrative missteps, but that crumbled when Alvarez laid out the financial transfers, the forged signatures, and the phishing emails. The moment that sealed it came on day 3, when Beth, my daughter, took the stand. She wasn't testifying about the cabin. She was there to talk about something else. A letter Alora had sent to her school counselor claiming I was mentally unfit to supervise construction and should be evaluated for safety risk. She was 16 at the time. She didn't tell me about it until the subpoena came. "I thought if I showed the letter to the wrong person, they'd try to take me away from my dad," she said, voice steady but tight. "She made us feel like criminals, just for building something together." Even the judge looked rattled. The verdict came back fast, guilty on all counts. Alora was sentenced to 7 years with eligibility for parole after 4. She was also ordered to pay restitution to every homeowner involved. We held a neighborhood gathering that weekend, not a celebration, more like a reckoning. People brought dishes, told stories, shared plans for gardens and porch swings and community events that had been stifled for too long. Beth and I added a second sign next to the hideout. Carved into pine, it read, "Built by hands, not permission." Someone took a photo. It ended up on the town's tourism website. Funny how things change. The new board, now 5 members strong, rotated leadership every 6 months. We added a conflict resolution mediator, funded a community improvement grant, and let residents vote on projects every quarter. No more architectural reviews, no more anonymous reports, just neighbors. One afternoon, I found Jason Bell, the guy with the fake compliance badge, standing near the creek, hands in his pockets. He looked sheepish. "I didn't know how far it went," he said. "I thought I was helping." "You were helping her," I replied. He nodded. "I know that now. I'd like to make it right." I handed him a paintbrush. "Deck railing needs a second coat." He stayed 3 hours, didn't complain once. By summer, the cabin had hosted 2 book clubs, a community potluck, and a wildlife photography class led by a retired ranger. Someone even donated a weatherproof chalkboard so kids could leave messages on the trail. Beth left one that made me stop mid-step. It said, "We don't run from rules, we change the ones that don't belong." She didn't ask permission to write it, didn't need to, and that was exactly the point. 2 months after Alora's conviction, Millridge Hollow was in the middle of its first real transformation in years. Without the chokehold of her authoritarian grip, residents finally felt free to shape the neighborhood into something livable, something human. But as the new board handled day-to-day governance with transparency and fairness, one last thread remained dangling: the shell management company she'd used to siphon money from HOA funds. The board had already voted to terminate all contracts affiliated with the company, which had operated under the name Pine Valley Services. But when the board's treasurer, a former CPA named Malik, began reviewing archived payments, he discovered two unusual charges buried in old maintenance budget's: monthly payments to a cleaning crew that had never been seen, and quarterly invoices marked emergency asset storage. Malik flagged them immediately. He and I met at the community center with the rest of the board. "There's something wrong with this," Malik said, spreading out scans of the invoices. "The cleaning crew doesn't have a license on file. And this storage expense, it's listed under a company that doesn't even exist in the state registry." I leaned in, scanning the documents. "Where's the address listed for the storage?" "A warehouse on the edge of town, registered under Oakley Holdings LLC." We all stared at the name. Janice crossed her arms. "You think she was storing something there, property she bought with HOA funds?" Malik nodded. "That would explain the missing budget lines, but we can't access it. It's under a private lease." "Not for long," I said. I made a call to Alvarez. The detective picked up and listened without interruption as I laid out the discovery. When I mentioned the lease being under Oakley Holdings, his tone sharpened. "That company came up in our financial trace," he said. "We didn't have a warrant for the storage unit before, but now we do." "I'll meet you there tomorrow." The next morning, 5 of us drove out in 2 trucks. The warehouse sat at the end of a gravel access road, flanked by rusted fencing and a row of dead mesquite. Alvarez arrived with a warrant in hand and a locksmith in tow. The door lifted with a metallic groan, revealing rows of metal shelving. At first glance, it looked like surplus office equipment: filing cabinets, sealed boxes, plastic bins. But as we stepped inside and started opening containers, it became clear. This was more than simple theft. Alora had kept detailed records, and not just HOA finances. Inside one file cabinet were dozens of manila folders, each labeled with the name of a neighborhood resident. Some were thick, others barely a few pages. Each contained photos, handwritten notes, copies of personal correspondence, even maps. Surveillance logs. One folder included printed screenshots of a resident's private social media activity, annotated with times and handwritten remarks. Janice opened a folder and froze. "This is my house," she whispered. "These are pictures of my backyard, my dog, my granddaughter." Alvarez was already on his phone, calling it in. We stood in stunned silence as deputies began photographing every corner of the unit. One of them pulled aside a plastic tarp in the far corner and revealed several cardboard boxes marked archive. Inside were VHS tapes, labeled by date and location. I pulled one out and read the label. April 3 Creek Path, 6:00 p.m. to 8:00 p.m. Alvarez turned to one of the deputies. "Get this logged. I want a full inventory, and I want a digital forensic team out here today." When the extent of the files was revealed, the district attorney filed a supplemental indictment. Alora had not only defrauded the HOA, she had operated what amounted to a private surveillance operation targeting residents, tracking their movements and gathering information to use as leverage. The charges now included unlawful surveillance, invasion of privacy, and criminal harassment. The DA added a request for a permanent restraining order on behalf of all affected homeowners. News of the discovery spread fast. Local media ran front-page stories with headlines like "HOA Tyrant Ran Secret Spy Network" and "Neighborhood Watch or Personal Vendetta." Reporters parked near the entrance of the hollow for days, trying to get interviews with residents. Most declined. Beth pulled me aside one evening while we were repainting the old sign by the trailhead. Was she watching us too? She asked, eyes on the brush in her hand. I paused. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. She's gone now. And we'll make sure nothing like that ever happens again. The court moved quickly. With the community now considered victims of a broader criminal scheme, a restitution fund was set up using proceeds from the liquidation of Oakley Holdings. Every resident fined under Alora's administration received a refund, along with a written statement from the new board acknowledging the unlawful actions they endured. Some took the money and quietly moved on. Others stayed and helped rebuild. The hideout became more than just a quiet cabin. We converted the side room into a lending library. The porch hosted writing workshops, film nights, even a free tax prep clinic that Malik ran during the spring. Every month, someone new brought something to share. One evening, I sat at the edge of the creek with Helen, watching her granddaughter skip stones. She picked this spot, Helen said it felt safe. I nodded. It is now. The new bylaws had teeth. A clause was added requiring a public hearing and majority vote before any fines or enforcement measures could be introduced. All board meetings were live streamed for those who couldn't attend. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword, it was built into the bones of the place now. We even held a mock election for kids during the general board cycle. Beth helped organize it with a group of teens who'd started calling themselves the Junior Hollow Council. They proposed a butterfly garden and a new footbridge across the creek. Both were approved by vote. The bridge went up in late April. One morning I found Jason Bell sanding the railing, this time without being asked. He looked up and gave a small nod. "Never thought I'd be part of something like this," he said. "Feels good." I handed him a thermos of coffee. Takes a while to earn trust. But you're showing up. That summer, the community hosted its first festival. Not a big affair, no rides or vendors, just music, food, and people finally free to be themselves. Beth performed a song she wrote under the walnut tree. When she finished, the applause echoed through the trees. Before the crowd dispersed, I stepped up to the makeshift stage and said a few words. We built this place with our hands, but we kept it with our voices. That's what matters. No one gets to control a neighborhood with fear, not while we're here. People raised their cups. Some cheered. Some just stood quietly, smiling. Later that night, Beth and I sat on the cabin porch, the lanterns casting soft yellow light over the deck. She was sketching something in her notebook. "What's that?" I asked. She turned it toward me. It was a signed design, hand-drawn in pencil and ink. It read, "This land was never for sale. It was always home." I nodded. "Let's carve it in oak, make it permanent." We did. And as the seasons changed, the community didn't forget what happened. It remembered and grew stronger, not because of what we tore down, but because of what we chose to build in its place.